Next on our agenda, we have Gloria Tom from the Navajo Nation Department of Fish and Wildlife, and she's going to be talking about the Native American policy and some other issues. So, Gloria.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces this morning. I'm Gloria Tom. I'm the director for the Navajo Nation's Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm coming to you from Window Rock, Arizona. And I hope everyone out there is doing well and staying safe. And I just encourage all of you to continue to wear your mask, even though the rest of the world is sort of lagging on that, but we really need to take care of ourselves and our families. So it's good to see some of you on screen. I'd like to share my screen with you and go into my PowerPoint, which I can't see right now. Where is it? Let's see. Hold on. Sorry. Let me close some of my windows. I think that might be the problem, is I have too many things open. Okay, here we go. I hope you all can see my screen. Holler if you can't. What I wanted to do this morning in the time allotted to me is provide you with some updates to our Native American policy with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Our region here in the Southwest, we developed what we're calling an implementation plan of the Native American policy. And after I finish with that, I want to also provide you with a couple of updates with some federal legislation that Julie provided. The more we hear about it, the more informed and educated we are on these very important pieces of legislation, and hopefully it'll encourage us to take action, as tribes have a lot at stake in these legislations. So we'll start out with the Native American Policy Implementation Plan. Again, this is being developed by several tribes along with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It pretty much addresses the regions within the service, regions 6, 7, and 8. And our group was kind of convened back, right, I'd say within a year after the Native American policy was updated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we felt it was necessary to develop an implementation plan and get both tribal and service buy-in into that plan, and to make sure that the provisions within the policy are implemented adequately and effectively. So our little group comprised of a few tribes within primarily Arizona and a couple from New Mexico. We started the discussions, and then of course COVID happened and everything kind of stopped for a while, but we were able to pick that back up and start looking at continuing the development of that plan. And we've been working here recently with our Native American liaison, Wes, and leadership within the regional office to come to some final document. And what I want to do in my time here is go through what we're calling the action items within each of the provisions of the Native American policy. And so I want to pull up our the Word document that we're working with. And so I'm going to stop my share here and then pull up the Word document that I have. I hope all of you can see this. And again, the policy itself, the implementation plan, first of all, the Native American policy is on the website, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website, if you haven't seen it. Again, it was recently updated, I believe, in the 2018, 2019 timeframe. And the implementation plan that we've been working on, our latest draft is dated in July of this year. But in each of the sections within the policy, we've developed action items to basically identify some implementation strategies that need to happen to make sure that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is adequately implementing the policy. So the first section that I want to go to is the sovereignty and government-to-government relations portion. And the action items that we identified, there is a need for formal contacts within the tribes and also the service to ensure that government-to-government interactions take place. So one of the things that we wanted to do was designate formal points of contact. And from what I'm hearing, it's difficult to, especially with tribes, to keep up to date on changes in leadership, etc. But we need to do a better job, both tribes and service, to keep those points of contacts updated. The second action item is that the Native American liaison would provide information to all Southwest region employees regarding tribal sovereignty, government-to-government relations, tribal consultation, tribal trust responsibility, and cultural diversity and awareness. As part of that, a fact sheet would be developed and distributed to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employees. As part of the new employee orientation within the service, they would also receive this information along with a fact sheet. And then also training would be provided to all regional employees about those topics, and basically baseline training on how to work effectively with tribes. Other employees would be required to attend, such as regional and field office leaders and tribal liaisons and coordinators. They would be required to attend these trainings. And then, of course, the implementation team working in conjunction with the Native American liaison would develop education and training materials for the Southwest region. Another action item is that the Deputy Regional Director would seek to recognize individuals, offices, and programs that demonstrate outstanding efforts and/or competencies in tribal coordination. And then also to annually recognize tribes for outstanding cooperative efforts in fish and wildlife conservation. And then the Native American liaison would work with a National Native American Program staff to ensure laws, treaties, and histories on the Native American program website is current with information and relevant resources so that all service employees and tribal representatives can have access to that. In terms of the communications and relations, The regional director will develop a team to enhance communication and collaboration between the service and the tribes. All service employees will communicate and coordinate with tribes openly with the spirit of sovereign government relationships. The service will meet face-to-face with tribes when appropriate, as requested through a formal consultation process. Again, the Native American liaison will compile, maintain, and distribute service points of contacts for tribes. These points of contacts would be for government-to-government interactions. Other service employees within the region and field offices with tribal coordination duties who facilitate formal and informal interactions with tribes, and others who assist regional and field staff and tribes. The regional director will request each tribe designate representatives to serve as point of contacts for conducting business with the service. This could include elected officials, cultural departments, natural resource departments, legal departments, or others. Service programs will include a copy of the designated tribal points of contacts, and senior staff, service staff may coordinate with other agencies about mutual work with tribes to promote cross-agency efficiency and information sharing and ensure adequate federal tribal consultation. To facilitate interagency coordination, the Native American liaison will keep a list of tribal relations staff from other federal and state agencies within the region. And then, of course, the service and the tribes can enter into formal agreements that benefit both parties. And the liaison will maintain the records of all of these formal agreements. And these agreements will be consistent with federal and tribal laws and regulations and Fish and Wildlife Service policy. The appropriate service office may inform tribes when working with other agencies about actions that may affect those tribes. And this can include copying tribes on emails and letters, etc. In terms of resource management, the action items that were identified is the appropriate program official may work with tribes to develop agreements for cooperative management of resources. When applicable, the service will encourage tribes to include states, federal land management agencies, and other non-governmental organizations in these discussions. The field supervisor will notify affected tribes as early as possible about informal, when appropriate, and formal Section 7 consultations, and will collaborate with affected tribes with approval of the federal action agency. And the service can provide biological opinions to affected tribes to the maximum extent permissible by law. Other action items are the field supervisor will offer to collaborate with affected tribes when developing or implementing candidate species conservation agreements and implementing conservation actions. The field supervisor will offer to collaborate with affected tribes when developing habitat conservation plans, when developing recovery plans and implementing recovery actions that affect tribes. The field supervisor will offer to consult with affected tribes when proposing to list or delist species prior to the rule being published. And then consult with tribes when proposing critical habitat prior to publishing. The appropriate service program will provide assistance in developing management plans for fish and wildlife resources if a tribe requests. And then the service official may contact other federal and state agencies to ensure coordination and cooperation with tribes for all service trust resources, management activities that may affect or involve tribes. Refuge managers will offer to consult and collaborate with tribes on resource use and management on refuge lands. Designated fish and aquatic conservation representatives will assist tribes in their fish and wildlife management needs if requested by tribes. And then they will also collaborate with tribes to implement an early detection and rapid response framework to address, manage, and prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. And will collaborate with the regional broodstock coordinator to identify production needs and distribute fish eggs to tribes through the National Broodstock Program. So that was resource management. Culture and religion. Action items are to issue an annual memorandum to all employees and field offices outlining guidance and resources available to facilitate tribal access to feathers, including the Eagle Handling and Distribution Handbook, regional permit for salvage of eagles and other migratory birds, and the National Eagle Repository and Non-Eagle Feather Repository. The Regional Native American Liaison, External Affairs, Office of Law Enforcement and Migratory Birds Office, in coordination with tribes, will develop an education and outreach plan for tribes on federal laws protecting fish and wildlife, including how to obtain protected wildlife or wildlife parks for cultural purposes. And then upon tribal requests, refuge managers will consult with tribes on a government-to-government basis to determine reasonable access to refuge lands and identify any applicable permits for traditional activities. For law enforcement, action items are that the Office of Law Enforcement Supervisor will consult with tribes to determine the type of law enforcement technical assistance needed and available through the service. The supervisor will communicate and coordinate with tribal wildlife law enforcement programs and personnel about law enforcement operations on or adjacent to tribal lands when it is feasible and appropriate to do so, which may include updates. The supervisor will assist tribal law enforcement with investigations that require case presentation to an assistant U.S. attorney and use of the federal court system when it is feasible and appropriate to do so. The supervisor, in coordination with the service's forensic laboratory, may provide training to tribal law enforcement personnel in forensic and investigative techniques in resolving wildlife crimes. Training, law enforcement training for tribal law enforcement personnel through the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And this will be done in coordination with the special agent in charge in tribal law enforcement. And when a tribe requests assistance with criminal prosecution of any federal wildlife law in violation, regardless of the violator's tribal member status, the supervisor may assist the tribe with a referral to the Department of Justice. And the law enforcement supervisor may call an annual meeting between law enforcement personnel and tribal law enforcement. Tribal capacity building action items are service project leaders will make their technical experts available to assist tribes. Law enforcement supervisor will provide expertise, guidance, and assistance in developing, maintaining, and improving wildlife law enforcement programs within tribes. Project leaders in fish and wildlife conservation and ecological services will cooperatively review and or help develop tribal fish and wildlife conservation laws, regulations, strategies, and management plans if requested by the tribe. The regional director may identify opportunities, and as necessary, develop agreements with tribes to work together and exchange personnel, expertise, and information. The regional director will promptly address requests from tribes and other eligible entities for Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act contracts. The Native American liaison may assist tribal governments with identifying federal and non-federal funding sources available for tribal fish and wildlife resource management activities. Project leaders and the Native American liaison will work together to facilitate and assist in the education and development of Native Americans by providing educational programs, on-the-job training, and recruitment opportunities. The service may establish partnerships and cooperative relationships with tribes, educational institutions, and professional development initiatives to develop and implement natural resource curriculum, cooperative education, and professional development programs. The service will disseminate information to tribes on employment and professional development opportunities. Designated program personnel and/or Native American liaison may provide information on and promote national youth career development opportunities for tribal youth. Designated program personnel or Native American liaison may coordinate with tribes when working with other agencies and organizations to increase tribal youth education in natural resource fields. The appropriate service program will provide tribal governments and their staff access to service fish and wildlife training programs, including those at the National Conservation Training Center in West Virginia. The service will invite tribes to help develop and implement training for service employees. Primarily, we're referring to tribal cultural awareness and sensitivity, and then improve the understanding of tribal natural resource values, consultation practices, policies, tribal rights, treaties, and trust responsibilities, and appropriate law enforcement policy issues. The Native American liaison will request a list of learning opportunities hosted by tribes to enhance the service's understanding of fish and wildlife management on tribal lands. The Native American liaison will cross-train service employees and tribal staff on each other's responsibilities. And the designated program and/or Native American liaison may collaborate with tribes to seek funding through service-wide programs for landscape scale habitat conservation projects to conserve aquatic habitats on tribal lands. Implementation and monitoring. Action items are that the regional director will establish what we call a tribal advisory working group to enhance communication and collaboration between the service and tribes in the Southwest, and to assist the service and tribes with monitoring implementation of this policy. The assistant regional director will serve as the chair. The Native American liaison will serve as a co-chair. And then the regional director will appoint a member from each program to serve on the team. In coordination with tribes, the regional director will create an equitable representation formula and invite tribes to provide representatives to the team. And a tribal representative will serve as co-chair of the team for a term of no less than 2 years. Upon establishment of the national implementation team, which we hope will take place, the co-chairs will serve as representatives on that national team. Within the operation of the External Tribal Advisory Working Group, annual coordination meetings will be convened to review the effectiveness of the implementation plan. And the regional director, Native American liaison, in coordination with tribes, will compile and summarize annual reviews of the implementation plan. Based on the review, the team will evaluate the plan across the Southwest region. The tribal advisory working group and the Native American liaison will work together to develop an actionable work plan for each year and prepare a report with recommendations for appropriate improvements to the plan. The Native American liaison will oversee development of and seek training and educational opportunities for service employees who work with tribes or whose work affects tribes. Service programs or designated trainers will evaluate their training based on feedback and make revisions as needed to the training. Service programs will actively recruit qualified Native Americans. And if the service and a tribe disagree about policy implementation, the service will seek to resolve the issue. If there's an impasse, the program will elevate the matter and invite similar elevation within this tribal government. So it goes from the appropriate project leader to the assistant regional director to the deputy regional director and then to the regional director. And that is those are the proposed action items for each of the sections within the Native American policy. And I want to go back to the PowerPoint. And what's going to happen, let's see. Is today at 2 o'clock, as part of this conference, the draft implementation plan will be presented to all participants within this conference today again at 2 o'clock. And we're also seeking comments on the draft implementation plan. There's going to be a separate call, a separate webinar on the plan itself. It's on Thursday, August 12th from 11 a.m. to noon Mountain Standard Time. And there is a link. I didn't get the link, but I'm sure that the presentation at 2 o'clock today will provide that. They will provide that information. There's also a call-in number here if you're participating audio only. And again, tribal letters have been sent out inviting tribes to review and comment on the implementation plan. And these comments are due back to the service by August 30th of this month. And the plan is to review the comments and update the plan as appropriate and hopefully begin implementation of the plan beginning with the new fiscal year, October 1st. So that was it on the Native American policy, our regional implementation plan draft. And I really encourage all the tribes out there to take a look at it and let us know if we're missing something, or if you have other suggestions, please provide those suggestions or those comments prior to the August 30th deadline. What I wanted to do, Julie, provide a little bit of an update on a couple of major legislations that are that have potential impact on tribal conservation efforts here in the country. And I wanted to also do a quick update on these, because I think the more we hear about these, the better it is, because again, these bills have can provide tribes with tremendous opportunities to expand our conservation efforts on our lands. The first one being the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. We've been talking about this now for several years. Basically, RAWA came into being after a United Nations report concluded that 1 million plant and animal species are currently at risk across the country. And it doesn't matter where these 1 million plant and animal species are at, whether it's state land, federal land, or tribal lands. The bottom line is that we have approximately 1 million plant and animal species at risk right now. So RAWA was developed to address that. And it's gone through several major revisions. The first one, the one that is currently in play right now is amending the Pittman-Robertson Act, which we all know that tribes are not allowed to participate, primarily because we were left out. But basically, RAWA is attempting to amend the PR law. It calls for dedicated funding for conservation of America's at-risk fish and wildlife. Right now, it's calling for $1.3 billion that would go to states, and $97.5 million that would go to tribes for conservation efforts. And RAWA would provide state and tribal agencies with the funding needed to provide voluntary and cost-effective on-the-ground conservation work. This includes wildlife conservation and restoration, recovering endangered and threatened species, wildlife law enforcement, controlling risk to wildlife, including invasive species and disease, providing education and wildlife-based recreation.
You have 5 more minutes, Gloria.
The partnership, the RAWA partnership pretty much started with the National Wildlife Federation and the AWFA group, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which is primarily the state game and fish agencies. And then a lot of non-governmental organizations are also participating in that as well. It's the first time that in my career where we have actually been working hand in hand with AWFA to address conservation across the broad landscape. Currently, the Senate just introduced the bill 2372. Senator Heinrich from New Mexico and Senator Blunt from Montana introduced it into the Senate in July. And it's basically coming with full dedicated funding. A partial offset was included in the Senate bill that directs revenue through fines collected from natural resource or environmental related violations to help pay for RAWA. We do need tribal help in getting these bills through Congress. We have a tribal coalition right now that work with our congressional folks in DC, and we need more tribes to participate in those discussions because we really need to drive home that tribes really need this funding. We're doing what we can right now with what we have, but this will just add a little bit more to what we need to do on tribal lands. For the House, RAWA is the bill numbers 2773. It has 101 bipartisan co-sponsors, but we're wanting to get more. There was a hearing of the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee of the House Natural Resources Committee, and they held that hearing on July 29th, and they included RAWA along with 10 other wildlife and fisheries related bills. And the hearing went well, and we're expecting that the committee will move the bill forward sometime this fall. Another legislation that is coming to the forefront is the Tribal Wildlife Corridors Conservation Act. Just a real quick update, the Senator Lujan is introducing that bill this week. The bill that he's introducing will authorize $50 million for Tribal Corridors Grant Program. In the last Congress, $5 million was authorized. And then Senator Lujan is a member of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee and will obviously help push this bill through the process. The House update, the Wildlife Corridors Conservation Act was added as an amendment to the infrastructure legislation, and that passed on the floor in June. And it's authorized $5 million for a Tribal Wildlife Corridor Grant Program. And Congressman Gallego from Arizona is still planning to introduce the Tribal Wildlife Corridors Act in the House. And this legislation will also include an increase in funding. And again, we need tribal voices, to your congressional people, urging them to support these legislations. And if they're not co-sponsors, to sign on as co-sponsors. So that's pretty much my presentation. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer those. Thank you.
Hey, Gloria, this is Alvita. On the Native American policy, after people provide comments, I'm assuming that is the service, are they in agreement with your proposal right now? Or will they be reviewing it after everything's submitted to them?
I actually don't really want to respond to that. Maybe if Wes is on the, can we bring Wes Foster in? Because they have their own internal procedure, and you know, I don't want to misspeak.
Maybe I'll ask them this afternoon then.
Yeah, I think it'd probably be a better, but we have been working jointly, our small tribal group, we've worked jointly with regional folks to come up with the current draft. As with tribes, there's always things missing that we wish were there, but aren't there. But you know, it's my opinion. I think it's a pretty good shot at implementing the policy.
Yeah, it looks, to me, it looks good, like the comments you guys have. Of course, I always want money attached to every dang thing when it has to do with the federal agency. So, you know, but thank you guys for all your work. Are there any other questions for Gloria at this time? All right, thank you, Gloria.
Alvita?
Yeah, Butch?
Yeah, I had my hand raised. You didn't see my hand.
No, I was looking for it. Oh, there.
Just,
It's in the wrong spot. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Gloria, the question I have in your looking through this proposed policy, I think you know that one of my priorities has always been youth education and trying to get our tribal youth interested in hoping to get them in natural resource related fields of education. Do you see this new policy and working with the service enhancing that, being able to work with programs like yours there on the reservation and working with the society to perpetuate increased opportunities to reach out to our young people?
I think the policy, the implementation plan has a provision for tribes to engage in that conversation with the service in terms of not only promoting like youth involvement projects, like youth practicums, etc., but also the opportunity for like internships with the service. And again, I think there's provisions in there in terms of the capacity building section where you know, if tribes want to request more assistance from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on getting more youth involved, more youth employed, you know, I think the avenue is there. And then also, you know, just bringing that awareness not only to the tribes, but also to the service employees. One of the things that we found out in our discussions that a lot of the service employees have no idea what tribes are doing. They have no idea how to work with a tribe, how to approach a tribe. And I think the youth component is only something that has to happen. And the service has that ability to do that. So maybe we need to be a little bit more focused in terms of developing a specific action item for that youth involvement. I made note of that here. And again, comments are due by the end of the month. So if you want to bring that forward as one of the comments, that'd be great. I mean, I would like to see a more specific action item to that.
Okay, we have one more question from Wesley, and then we're gonna move on. Wesley?
Yes, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I was trying to speak before, but I couldn't through it. I just wanted to speak on that issue. Involving the youth is something that's totally super important to all of us. It's super important to me. There are some instances where it's mentioned within this policy, but I mean, I would like to reach out to anybody who's willing to work on this issue even outside of this policy. I mean, we have a lot going on. We just sent out quite a few opportunities under the ACE program. We've been working closely with the White Mountain Apache tribe to involve their youth down in our fisheries there and provide other opportunities. So this is something that's really near and dear to our hearts, and it's something that I hope that, I mean, we can all get together and work on collaboratively. I'm willing to invest whatever time and attention that needs to be spent to ensure that tomorrow's leaders are tribal leaders, and that they're following us, and there's people who are willing or be able to take our place after we're done serving these careers. So I mean, that's something that I hope that at any point that somebody wants to, or us as a group, we want to work on that issue, I definitely please reach out to me. I mean, I would love to work with anybody and everybody on that.
All right, thank you, Wesley. Thank you, Gloria. Okay, we're gonna move right on.